I'm Kathy with a K.
And I'm Kathy with a C.
And this is Killer Destinations. Today's destination is Los Angeles, California. Los Angeles is known across the globe for everything ranging from movie stars to sunny weather, the surfing culture, and earthquakes.
And homeless.
I wasn't going to go there, but yes, that too. And rigged elections. I'm putting it out there. We all know it's true. And while today Los Angeles is a sprawling metropolis, it has a fascinating history. It was originally founded as a Spanish settlement in 1781, and its original name was 13 words. Now, I'm not going to try and pronounce it in Spanish, but it translates to the town of Our Lady, the Queen of Angels, on the river Porciúncula. It wasn't until it was incorporated as a U.S. municipality in 1850 that the name was officially shortened to Los Angeles. And the river eventually became known as the LA River, most of which is now a concrete flood control basin. Los Angeles also has a geographical quirk that has caused many people to lose in trivia games, and Kathy apparently didn't know until today.
Did not know.
While Los Angeles kind of defines for people what it means to be a West Coaster, the city of Los Angeles, while on the coast, is actually geographically east of Reno, Nevada, a landlocked state, and Lake Tahoe doesn't count. Now, while some cities boast about their Michelin star restaurants and upscale cuisine, Los Angeles is the undisputed birthplace of more casual fare. It's the home of the French dip sandwich, the California roll, and the cheeseburger, and it's also the launching point for fast food giants McDonald's and Taco Bell. And even though it's not a giant, we're adding in In-N-Out to that because if you know, you know.
Animal-style French fries.
Protein-style double-double.
Yum, yum.
It's just a little before dinner, so I think we're hungry.
We're hungry.
But with a land area bigger than Rhode Island, Delaware, and Connecticut, with exponentially more people, it can sometimes still be a lonely and isolating place to live. And in 1999, one man who was down on his luck found out the hard way that Los Angeles isn't always the city of dreams. And tragically, he wasn't the only one.
On the morning of November 8th, 1999, the body of an elderly man was found near North La Brea and Melrose Avenue. A 911 call brought LAPD officer Lee Willman to the scene. And when he arrived, he saw a body lying across the middle of an alley. He checked for identification, but the man had no wallet or anything identifying who he was. But it was clear to Officer Willman that he had suffered a brutal death. The man's chest and torso were twisted and crushed, and he had abrasions on his face and grease and burns consistent with contact with a car's hot oil pan or muffler or tailpipe. So Officer Willman is checking this guy out, and he thinks that it looks like the man had been hit by a car, but there were no glass fragments or car parts at the scene of the accident. And, strangely, the dead man's legs were not broken, which normally occurs when you're hit by a car. So the lack of fractures meant that he wasn't standing up. And the placement of his body indicated he was run over by a car that was traveling slowly, as though it were intentionally placing pressure on certain points of the victim's body. 9 days later, two elderly women, 72-year-old Olga Rutterschmidt and 70-year-old Helen Golay, filed a missing persons report for a 70-year-old man named Paul Vados. He was Olga's cousin and had at one point been engaged to Helen. So using fingerprints, the police were able to confirm that the man found dead in the alley was in fact Paul Vados. Like his cousin Olga, Paul emigrated to Southern California from Hungary in the mid-1950s. And after Paul's wife died in 1985, he moved in with his daughter Stella in her Hollywood apartment. But 10 years later, when Paul moved to Northern California, Stella lost contact with her dad. So what happened was 2 years before Paul was found in this alley, he was back in Los Angeles, but he was unemployed and he was struggling with an alcohol addiction. So his cousin Olga paid for a very cheap apartment near Koreatown just to keep him off the streets. And so detectives went to visit the off-site apartment manager, and she told them that she'd promised Olga that she'd keep an eye on Paul. So the apartment manager and her daughter would check on Paul just about every day, making sure he was good and fed and basically kept safe.
And you know what, Kathy, I also read that if he was out at a bar and had had too much to drink, the bar manager would usually call them to let them know, and they'd go make sure he got home safely. Or if he was crumpled in a heap in front of the apartment building, they'd make sure he got inside.
That was a manager that was working overtime.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and this manager also told detectives that Paul was visited at least twice a month by cousin Olga, who would always bring him groceries when she visited. She made sure he had whatever he needed, bought him shoes, etc., etc. And then sometimes Olga would bring a friend of hers named Helen. But when the apartment manager hadn't seen Paul for a couple days, she got a little concerned and, went to his apartment, knocked on his door a few days in a row, but he never answered. So eventually she called Olga, and that's when Olga and Helen reported him missing to the police. So Paul's autopsy revealed that he died as a result of multiple traumatic injuries, including 48 fractures to his ribs. And the trauma to his chest area caused a fatal laceration to his aorta. And Officer Willman's initial suspicions were confirmed when the coroner determined that Paul's injuries were in fact consistent with having been run over by a slowly moving vehicle. However, Paul's toxicology report showed no evidence of drugs or alcohol in his system.
Years passed, and investigators were never able to find the person who was driving the car that hit Paul, and it went cold. But then, in June 2005, this is now 6 years after Paul's death, an overheard conversation brought the case back to life. So, Kath, here's what happened. Officer Lee Willman, who responded to the 911 call about Paul's death, was sitting at his desk in the LAPD's West Traffic Bureau squad room, and he happened to overhear a conversation at the desk directly across from his. LAPD Detective Dennis Kilcoyne was talking to an insurance company investigator named Ed Webster about a strange case, and it sparked Officer Willman's interest because the details of the case sounded similar to Paul Vados's death. Now, like with Paul's death, Detective Kilcoyne was called to a crime scene where a homeless man was found dead after being struck by a vehicle in a dark alley. But this time it was 5 miles away in the city of Westwood, which is actually the college town for UCLA. And I spent a lot of time there in my youth, in my disaffected youth.
Westwood used to be a place. Well, I don't know. It still probably is.
You know what? It hasn't been, but I might be looking at it differently because I've put on a few years.
Yeah. It was a place where everybody used to go and hang out, and it was packed on the weekends with kids.
Okay, so back to the story of the second man who was found dead after being hit by a car in an alley. In this case, the man had an ID card in his pocket, and it identified him as 50-year-old Kenneth McDavid. His chest and skull had been crushed, similar to the first victim. And Kenneth also had what looked like grease from a car's undercarriage smeared on his clothes and skin, also like first victim Paul. So this had led Detective Kilcoyne to surmise that Kenneth had been lying down, perhaps passed out, when he was run over by the car. But Kathy, interestingly, he noticed near the body there was a bicycle with its front tire removed, as if Kenneth had been fixing it. And so, the detective was like, that's kind of strange, because that doesn't fit the idea of a man passing out in the middle of an alley, right? And then the detective was also questioning, why would anyone stop in a dark alley to fix a bike when the better lit street was only a few feet away? And then, Kath, the detective's suspicions were raised even more when he went over to look at this bike tire that had been removed. And he saw that the tire itself was full of air and undamaged. So Detective Kilcoyne is thinking now, this doesn't look so much like an accident as it does a staged crime scene. But fortunately, when he canvassed the area around the alley, the detective found a nearby store that had a camera aimed directly at the entrance to that alley. And although neither victim Kenneth nor the perpetrator were caught on the camera, it did provide the detective with a possible avenue to investigate. It showed that right around the time of Kenneth's death, a vehicle that looked either like a Ford Taurus or Mercury Sable station wagon drove into the alley and past the camera. Then you see the brake lights come on, and soon after that, all of the vehicle's lights went dark, and it remained dark for about 5 minutes before the lights came back on and it drove away. Now, when toxicology tests came back, they showed that Kenneth had high levels of alcohol, Ambien, and hydrocodone, which is Vicodin, in his system. Kath, the levels were high enough that it was unlikely that Kenneth was even conscious. So it would have been almost impossible for Kenneth to have been riding a bicycle at the time of his death. So, remember, Officer Willman is listening to this whole story as Detective Kilcoyne is talking to the insurance investigator. And this is what changes everything. Detective Kilcoyne told the insurance investigator that they then started looking at the only lead they had, which was Kenneth's last known address on the ID that they found on the body. When they went to his apartment, the manager told them that Kenneth no longer lived there because he hadn't been able to pay the rent, so he ended up homeless. But the manager had stayed in contact with Kenneth, and he had recently told the manager that his good friend had taken him in and let him stay with her. The friend's name was Helen Golay. So, of course, at this point, Officer Willman is jumping across that desk, right? He just had to interrupt this conversation because Officer Willman knew that name. So he tells the detective and the insurance investigator about the case he'd caught 6 years prior that had long gone cold. So, of course, Officer Willman toddles off to get the cold case file because I believe officers toddle as well.
All the time.
All the time. And when he gave it to Detective Kilcoyne, 2 names jumped off the page: Olga Rutterschmidt and Helen Golay. According to Detective Kilcoyne's notes, the 2 women who claimed second victim Kenneth's body were the same women who claimed first victim Paul's body: Olga and Helen. So now insurance investigator Webster is hopping up and down, but unlike prosecutors, he's doing it in a good way. The reason investigator Webster had stopped at the station to speak to Detective Kilcoyne was because Webster had opened an investigation into a recent claim on 2 accidental death policies that had been taken out on second victim Kenneth McDavid. And Kath, an accidental death policy does exactly what it says. It pays out on accidental deaths. This is different.
Thank you.
It's funny how they do that sometimes.
Yeah.
But life insurance policies can pay out on any number of ways that you die.
Right.
Now, since the policies were just shy of 2 years old, it was standard practice for this insurance company to open a routine investigation, basically just making sure all the I's were dotted and the T's were crossed, and that the information on the policies was correct. But when insurance investigator Webster began looking into the policies, which, by the way, totaled $1 million,
Cha-ching.
he immediately found inconsistencies. So, of course, now the red light's going off in his head, and he's like, uh-oh, we got to look into this. Just in case you were wondering what he said.
I'm pretty sure that was a direct quote.
So, in the policies, the beneficiaries, who were Helen and Olga, were described as being business partners with Kenneth. But as we know, at the police station when they claimed his body, they represented themselves as his fiancé and cousin. In fact, Kathy, once the investigator started looking into the policy more, almost everything on the application was false, including where Kenneth lived and worked. But when insurance investigator Webster tried calling the women to question them, they refused to speak to him. And so that's when the investigator got into the car and toddled on down to the police station to ask questions about the investigation into Kenneth's death. So now connecting the deaths of Paul and Kenneth led to the assumption that it was murder and insurance fraud. So the FBI and the California State Department of Insurance were called in on the case. And just a little bit of digging revealed that the 2 women, who were now in their mid to late 70s, had taken out more than 20 policies on both first victim Paul and second victim Kenneth totaling more than $5 million. And this was despite the fact that both men were essentially homeless. Paul would have been if they hadn't put him up in an apartment, and unemployed.
Okay, so who are these two lovely ladies? Investigators say Helen was the more sophisticated and polished of the two and was likely the brains behind the scheme. Helen Golay was born in Texas in 1931, and her father died in a car accident when she was very young, and then she lived with her maternal grandfather until he too passed away, and after that she basically was shuffled around to different relatives. And through it all, she did very well in school, and she was well liked, but she didn't have a happy childhood. After graduation, she headed to California, where she married Vernon Golay and had 2 daughters. After they divorced, she married again, had another daughter, and then divorced her second husband. Helen then found her way to Santa Monica in the 1980s. I wonder if she went to Westwood.
She probably was very familiar with it.
It's not far. And she tried her hand at real estate. And after some really lean years, she slowly saved money and began acquiring rental properties, primarily through probate sales.
Which the challenge with that back in the day is that in 1976, I believe, rent control was imposed in Santa Monica.
In Santa Monica. Yeah, I don't know if her rentals were in Santa Monica specifically.
They were, and that's why she had some lean years.
Ah.
And it wasn't until later that they started making exceptions. So it was certain types of apartment buildings were under rent control, but not all of them. And so that's why I think she was going through some of the probate sales, because they weren't the large apartment complexes.
Right. They were affordable.
Right. And so do you remember when I lived in Santa Monica when I was getting my MBA?
Right.
I was illegally subletting a rent control apartment. And what the powers that be in Santa Monica did was that I think it was in 94, they had said, okay, you know what? Your building is under rent control, but when someone moves out of an apartment, you can put that apartment at market rates. So it wasn't the whole building yet, but it was that one apartment. So a woman I had known since I was little, she was renting a place, but had gotten a job in Northern California. And so it was rent controlled at $800 a month. Okay. And I was 4 blocks from the ocean. Like, it was prime territory. There was a guy from grad school who lived just down the block from me. He was paying more than $3,000 a month. But here's the challenge. And this is where rent control goes bad for any of you who thinks it's a good idea. And I'm talking to you folks in New York City.
Yeah.
But because my friend's apartment was in rent control, the landlord refused to do anything. So like when her garbage disposal backed up, she had to call the plumber and pay it. She had to buy the new one, have it installed. She had to replace carpet that was 30 years old because, of course, he's not going to touch it.
Right.
And so basically, like, she had a nice place because she had paid all the money to do it, but that wasn't the point of rent control.
No, I know. But here's the problem.
And that's what they do.
The bigger problem with rent control is that we always want the dollar to be the discriminating factor. So if I'm rich and I can afford your apartment, it's mine. Or if I get a couple friends together and we can afford our apartment, it's ours. When you take away the dollar as being the discriminating factor, it leads to other things like, okay, I'm not going to rent my apartment to any redheaded lesbians. I'm not going to rent my apartment to a woman who has kids. I'm not going to rent my apartment to name any whatever.
To men who aren't 6 feet tall.
Right. It creates discrimination.
Well, and it creates security issues too, because he wasn't like making sure the door had a working lock on it to get into the building.
Okay, so back to Helen's lean years in Santa Monica real estate. This is in the 80s, like I said a minute ago, and she also started scamming at that point. And she would basically do anything to make money. So she began doing frivolous lawsuits and just basically suing anyone who was unlucky enough to get in her way. And so Helen's bestie, Olga, was born in Hungary in 1933 and lived there through World War II and wound up finishing high school there. She immigrated to the United States in 1957 with her husband, and they owned a downtown LA coffee shop for more than a decade. And I wish I knew the name of it, but you don't have any idea what it is?
No.
Okay. I just was wondering if they were part owners of the pantry ever.
There's no way.
I know. It'd be too delicious. But anyway, so she and her husband eventually divorced. They had no children, and he moved back to Hungary. And once her husband was gone and the coffee shop was closed, Olga's employment record was a little sparse. Basically, she took whatever kind of job she could get to make enough money to pay rent. And so what happened is the two women, Helen and Olga, became friends in the 1980s. This is so classic. After meeting in Los Angeles in a very 80s Jane Fonda sort of way. They went to the same gym and they found themselves frequenting the same aerobics classes. And I'm 100% certain that they had leg warmers and a headband. So anyway, on the surface, the two women seemed to be very different. Helen had a very comfortable lifestyle, and she owned several properties that she used as rentals in Santa Monica, while Olga was just trying to get by. But despite their varying degrees of wealth, they also had a lot in common. In addition to being close in age, they each had miserable childhoods, and Helen would often complain about feeling lost after her father died in a car crash when she was young. And of course, the Hungarian-born Olga could top that because she received injuries during World War II bombing raids.
Yeah, if anyone's keeping score, Olga won.
Exactly.
I'm not sure you could even go up against that.
I met a woman once who was in England during the bombing of Coventry, which, as you know, was a very controversial situation with, who's it? I can't even think of his name.
Are you talking about Churchill?
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
I didn't know if you were talking about a specific pilot.
Yeah, no. It was Churchill. But anyway, her story had me captivated and horrified. It's incredible what children can survive. Incredible. Anyway, so after meeting at the gym, Helen and Olga began hanging out together at the Beverly Hills Hotel and the Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel. They were both fit and attractive and gained the attention of men staying at the hotels.
So they were the Richie Riches.
Yeah, they were the Richie Riches, and Helen would wear short skirts, and she had apparently a towering blonde bouffant hairdo.
I swear it added like a foot to her height.
And of course, Olga had her Zsa Zsa Gabor accent, which...
Okay, I want you to imitate it. I know you can do it.
Okay, let me think about this. No, I can't.
Okay.
Now I'm put on the spot.
Okay.
I can't do it. But anyway, so this accent beguiled men who had enough money to lavish these ladies with gifts, and they were expensive gifts. But of course, soon this wasn't enough. The attention, the expensive gifts weren't enough. These ladies wanted to be rolling in the bucks. So Olga learned how to do pyramid, essentially, schemes using dozens of credit cards. And so she would use one card to pay off another, to pay off another, to pay off another, and she just kept going. And she never paid the banks or the companies that issued the cards and opened them up in other people's names sometimes and just live la vida loca without having any responsibility attached to it. And Helen, for her part, engaged in questionable transactions involving property transfers, estates, and insurance policies. And Helen once told a friend how a woman could score a windfall by marrying an older man, insuring his life, then secretly feeding him daily doses of Viagra until it triggered a fatal heart attack. I'm sure she's not the first, but, the question is, like, when she was giving him these doses, did she perform her duties? Otherwise, that's really not fair, dying in that condition.
Can you imagine if they had an open casket?
Oh my God, what was that Irish series? Oh my God, with the three sisters. Come on, you know it.
Mm-mm.
Yes, you do. Oh my God, it was so funny. And that was a scene in the movie. Like one of the it was a series. It was a series. And one of the very first scenes was a guy lying in the casket and the wife is trying to like put something over his junk.
So over the years, Helen and Olga fine-tuned their scammy ways and came up with a way to make the big bucks. And of course, we know now it was insurance policies. In 1997, so this is 2 years before first victim Paul died, they started working with a church group to help homeless men, specifically men who didn't have any family. Now, they would offer to put the men up in one of Helen's apartments, they would pay the men's bills and take care of them, and in exchange, all the men had to do was sign a few papers and give the women some personal information so that the women could sign them up for public assistance. And that's how Helen and Olga met first victim Paul in 1997. For 2 years, they put him up in one of Helen's apartments, and Olga took care of Paul, who had health problems. But Paul didn't know that they used the personal information he provided to them to take out multiple accidental death policies on him. And Helen and Olga opened policies together, like as business partners, as well as separately, for a total of 19 policies in all.
That is not suspicious at all.
Well, but it was with a number of different insurance companies. There were probably seven or eight of them that they were going to. And what I also read, Kathy, is that some of the policies that were taken out by Helen and Olga were low-cost term life insurance policies, but they also took out a number of accidental death policies as well. And in the term life, you can get the maximum amount of face value for a very small premium. And all of the policies had a 2-year contestable period. And Kathy, remember, the reason this came to the attention of Detective Kilcoyne was that insurance investigator Ed Webster had gone to him because second victim Kenneth died just shy of that 2-year period, which is why the insurance company wanted to make sure all the I's were dotted and T's were crossed before they paid out on any claim. But Kathy, what happened after first victim Paul's death is that the insurance companies were taking a really long time to pay out. So after a year passed without any payment, Olga and Helen threatened to sue the insurance companies. And so instead of going to court, the insurance companies settled with them for just under $600,000. Now with second victim Kenneth, after they moved him into an apartment, Helen and Olga submitted 17 applications for insurance policies and accidental death policies. Now, most of the applications described Helen as his fiancée and Olga as his cousin, and while some listed both women as beneficiaries, others only listed one of them. In the end, after Kenneth's death, Helen received a total of $1.5 million and Olga received a total of $675,000.
You know what they were doing? I'm sure these two ladies were, partnering up on some of the policies, and then I'm sure they were just going off to the side. I'm going to apply on my own to Acme Insurance Company.
Exactly.
And just,
And too bad, so sad that the other one doesn't get it.
Exactly.
It's good to have friends.
It certainly is. I have life insurance on you. Did I ever tell you that?
Well, no, but I'm glad you do because I have it on you. I bet mine is more.
I bet it's not.
I bet I might have a deal with your husband. Okay, so according to court records, after detectives realized that the women had used the church homeless outreach to target Paul and Kenneth, they decided it was prudent to place the women under surveillance. And Kath, the detectives were stunned when they were told that the women continued to mingle with the homeless men at the local church. So they kept watching, but after becoming concerned about the safety of several of the men, in May of 2006, Helen Golay and Olga Rutterschmidt were arrested.
Can you imagine the police totally doing their own little investigation? Like, okay, I'm just going to go into this homeless shelter or wherever these ladies were operating at the church, whatever, and just watching them.
Yeah.
Pretending to be homeless and watching these ladies who had just collected fat sacks and
still want more
just
money.
Like looking for the next vulnerable man.
Exactly. To kill.
Yeah. Crazy.
So after the two women were arrested, of course, the newspapers covered everything. A man walked into the police station one day and said, I think I might have almost been one of their victims. Jimmy Covington had seen this story in the paper about their arrests and recognized them. He said that in 2001, so this is 2 years after first victim Paul was killed, Jimmy had been homeless. And he was approached by Olga with an offer of a place to stay in exchange for filling out a few forms. However, when she and Helen began pressuring him for more and more personal details, like his mother's maiden name and his social security number, Jimmy felt like something was off. So he basically said, see ya, wouldn't want to be ya, and he dipped. But after hearing Jimmy's story, the detectives did a little digging of their own and discovered that Olga and Helen had taken out a life insurance policy on Jimmy after they first approached him to help.
Wow. There but for the grace of God go I.
His guardian angel was working overtime that day.
Totally. That's crazy. So the trial of the two beauty queens / barflies / fraudsters
/ Jane Fonda wannabes.
Exactly. Started in March of 2008. They were tried together on 2 counts of first-degree murder and 2 counts of conspiracy to commit murder, and they both pled not guilty. The jury was told that in total, the two women collected $2.8 million from the insurance policies that they took out on Paul and Kenneth. Now, for the prosecution, some of the most damning pieces of evidence were uncovered when the two women were in custody. During a search of Helen Golay's house, detectives discovered that she was a meticulous record keeper, as someone of her generation was. So they found documents in her house pertaining to Paul and Kenneth, as well as rubber stamps with the two men's signatures. Like, that's a super old school thing.
Totally.
My dad had like a rubber stamp of a signature that a secretary would use. But anyway, they also found large quantities of Ambien and Vicodin. And of course, those were two of the drugs that were found in Kenneth's system. But one of the most critical pieces of information they discovered was a woman's stolen driver's license, and it had a sticky note attached to it with a partial VIN and license plate number. So detectives traced the vehicle, and they discovered it belonged to a 1999 Mercury Sable station wagon.
Ding, 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 ding.
Exactly. And so that was the same make and model of the car that was seen in the alley around the time that Kenneth was killed. And this car had been purchased using the name on the stolen ID, and detectives also found receipts from the night when Kenneth died, showing that Helen had called AAA to come tow the vehicle. So apparently, they commit this murder, purportedly.
Allegedly.
Probably.
Likely. Definitely.
Yeah. And their car breaks down a block from where Kenneth's body is found. So they have to call AAA. Helen then tells the tow truck driver, yeah, I don't know what happened. I ran over something. I have a broken fuel line. So the Mercury Sable was then towed to Helen's house, and then it was abandoned just around the corner from her house and impounded because of the accumulated parking violations. So the vehicle was actually sold at a lien sale. However, during all of this investigation, where in May 2006, the LAPD found the car and basically bought it back. And so the criminals examined the car's undercarriage, and they found human blood, hair, and tissue samples.
Yeah, because who cleans the car's undercarriage?
Exactly. And these tissue samples matched the DNA of Kenneth. And so, of course, the prosecution's like, the probability that a randomly selected person would have the same DNA profile is 1 in 10 quadrillion.
The juries want to hear the numbers.
Yeah, but I think it would just wash over me. I'd be like, prove that. So the prosecution had a freaking ace in the hole. Olga and Helen, when they were taken into custody, were put inside a jail holding cell. These two little biddies in their 70s were like, meh, 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 meh.
Yeah, they're mid-70s now.
I know.
We should all hope to be that active when we're in our mid-70s.
Seriously.
Maybe doing something different, but still.
Yeah, something better.
Yeah.
So anyway, Olga started berating Helen about taking out all these extra insurance policies, which really, screwed the situation. Olga basically was like, it's your fault. You can't take out that many insurance policies. You were greedy. That's the problem. And Helen was like, yeah, I know.
Yeah. What's she supposed to say to that?
And all of this was on video.
So if you're ever put in a jail cell with your friend, zip it.
Zip it, lock it, put it in your pocket.
Exactly.
So the defense lawyers put on their case, and they're like, look, these two ladies, they were involved in insurance fraud. What they did was disgusting. It was terrible, but they did not conspire to murder anybody. They might have been sleazy doing their little insurance schemes, but they actually took care of these men. They were old, they were sick, they were homeless, and they were probably going to die fairly quickly anyway, so why would these ladies need to murder them? Prosecutors countered that with, most of these policies were accidental death policies, not policies for death by natural causes.
Oops.
Exactly.
And the defense was like, okay, you know what? The jury's going to love them. They're going to be like, yeah, they were going to die. It was good to take care of them off the streets in their last moments, right? And the prosecution comes in and they're like, nope. Denied.
I can see right through that bouffant. Yeah. It probably had a hint of blue by that point.
April 18th, 2008, Both women were found guilty of conspiracy to murder Paul Vados and Kenneth McDavid, and of the first-degree murder of first victim Paul. However, interestingly, only Helen was convicted of the first-degree murder of second victim Kenneth. Regardless, they were both sentenced to consecutive terms of LWOP.
Now, this is just a guess because it was Helen who called AAA.
And she was the one driving the car, presumably.
Right. So basically, Olga can be like, yep, nope, not me, prove it.
I didn't know she was doing it.
I wasn't there.
I actually had that same guess in my head. And Killer Destination School of Law does actually help with insurance scams. So I figured I was pretty close.
And they allow speculation. So
exactly, which is awesome. Now, both women filed multiple appeals, but all were denied. And Kath, I looked everywhere to find out when these women died, right? Because they were in their 70s 20 years ago. And I'm like, why is nobody reporting on their deaths? Well, it's because they're still alive. Both women are in their mid-90s and still sitting in prison.
Wow.
That's when you don't want a long lifespan.
Right.
At least personally. Helen Golay is 95 years old and at the California Institution for Women in Corona, California. Olga Rutterschmidt is 93 years old and incarcerated at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla, California.
So when Kathy and I record, we always go off on tangents and
shocking to all of you, I know.
Tell stories. So this is one of the stories that didn't make it into the episode, but that we thought was funny and you might want to hear.
So always listen after the last bong in case there's something there that's a treat.
Or a hit.
Or a miss. What's a hit?
Like a bong hit?
Oh. Didn't even get that. But this time it was 5 miles away in the city of Westwood, which is actually the college town for UCLA. And I spent a lot of time there in my youth. And I was only there in high school because I went to the crosstown rival for college. So why would I ever go back to Westwood?
Right.
But once I got a car, Westwood was a destination.
Yeah. I mean, I was there more in high school than college, even though my husband went to college there.
Exactly.
And then remember they started getting gang shootings there.
Yes.
And the streets just dried up.
Exactly. And I'm not sure that they've actually gone back. I'm sure. And you know what? The pandemic had to hit them hard too. But I've been there a couple times lately, like when I would take the kids up and do an LA trip.
Uh-huh.
And we'll usually go into Westwood because there's a restaurant there that one of the nephews likes.
The hamburger place?
Yeah.
I can't think of the name of it, but I know what you're talking about.
And the movie theaters. Do you remember the movie theater lines used to be around the block?
Yes.
Okay. No one's there.
No one goes to theaters anymore.
They don't. And it was, I mean, these are like Saturday evenings.
Yeah.
So anyway, so yes, it's changed a lot, but a lot of fun memories.
Right. Before the shootings, you know.
Underage memories. I remember the funniest thing. We met these guys in Westwood and like at least a junior, senior high school. Cause like I said, once I went to SC, we never went back to Westwood, but, we meet these guys. So we're just talking. They gave us alcohol, whatever. I remember having this conversation and I was like, oh my God, I love rugby. And he was like, seriously? You love rugby? And I had the only answer I could have, which was, oh, their shirts are so cute.
That's true. Rugby shirts were hip.
They were super cute.
I have one funny recollection of Westwood. I was in 7th grade and my friend Mary came and said, my mom has concert tickets. Do you want to go to this concert with me in Westwood? Okay. I'd heard of Westwood, but I'd never been there. I mean, I was freaking 13 or 12 or whatever. So I'm like, a concert. I am going to be so cool. She drops us off at this small theater in Westwood and we have no idea who this band is that we're going to see. It turns out it was Peggy Lee, who was 1,000 years old.
I don't even know who that is.
Oh my God. She was like...
She sounds like a country singer.
No.
Okay.
She was like more like... she was kind of like a very aged Barbara Streisand or very aged Helen Reddy. Like she... And okay, the average age in this place was 104 years old. And there were Mary and I sitting and she comes out on the stage and we cannot contain ourselves.
I bet.
We laughed. We lasted like 2 songs. We were giggling the entire time. We could not freaking believe that her mother thought that we would want to sit through a Peggy Lee concert. So
By
anyway,
saying you only lasted 2 songs, do you mean that's how long you were there until you got kicked out?
we didn't get kicked out
you
because
kicked yourselves out.
Yeah, we escorted ourselves out. But I couldn't. We were laughing so hard.
That's hysterical.
Yeah, but not making noise, which makes you laugh even more.
Exactly.
When you try not to make noise.
Exactly.
Anyway,
I'm sure they were glad you left too.
they were.